You can see that my holding jig has become progressively more complicated as I got deeper into this and discovered the various levels and the way I'd need to arrange things. So I'm at the stage now where I'm ready to cut the two pieces and get ready to splice them. As you can hopefully see, I've got these parts spliced together here, and I'm just checking my dimensions to make sure that everything's absolutely correct before I finally fit this and solder it in place. The critical dimension I want to measure here is the width across the inside of that area there. So it's not particularly easy to get your calipers in there because things aren't as square as they might be. I make that to be about 3 millimeters. And I've got a body here, an 142 body. That makes that to be considerably less, about 2 millimeters. So I think I need to bring in my two ends closer together, which doesn't surprise me greatly because I was generous in allowing metal either end. So if I've got to shorten one end, I've got to decide which is the best end to shorten. It's much harder to hold this piece, of course, in order to shape it, so I think I'll do my shortening from this end, and basically I'll trim off some here, here, and in the depths of that pocket. Well, it's all done, it's all soldered up. We've now got the button on the end of the lever, and everything latches nicely into position. So I'm going to call that one a win, and I suppose the next thing I've got to do with this camera is clean up the rangefinder and get that fitted and adjusted. But my bench at the moment is covered in scraps of wood, pieces of paper, jigs, sawdust from here to Christmas. I'm going to have a big clean up before I get to that stage. Well, I'm just going to wipe the rangefinder because there's a bit of dust and rubbish on there. I'm just using naphtha for this, but I'm keeping away from the optical surfaces. That's fine. So, cleaning the glass. Well, there's not much glass here to clean. There's the prism block here, the reflecting prism block. And there are only two faces available on that, so I'll clean those. I will certainly not disturb the prism, remove it, or attempt to remove it from the holder. That way lies madness and death. The semi-silvered mirror. That's tricky. Now the inside surface, the one that faces to the eyepiece, that was silvered. The front surface is plain glass. I will clean the front surface. I will leave the semi-silvered surface well alone. If the grime was distributed evenly, we've just removed half the problem. In practice that looked relatively clean. The silvering looks pretty thin to me, but that's good to go. The shaft that comes up through the camera, come on, hurry up and keep up, camera. Oh, that's hopeless. I'll zoom out, see if it'll catch up. That's better. The shaft that comes up from the camera that has to rotate inside this bush. Now I'm fairly sure I've already wiped something on there, but I'm just going to take a little bit of molybdenum paste. Now you could use any lubricant in there just about. You're reasonably sure it wasn't going to go nasty and sticky. And we'll put the rangefinder in place. That shaft probably needs to pull up from there, but I bet it's reluctant to do so. I'll put a screw in the top, see if we can pull it up. That's better. That's just lifted into position. The rangefinder body is held to the camera top with 3 large black screws. Now the rangefinder here is exactly the same as you'd find on a Retina II Type 142. I'll get those 3 screws done up tight. Screwdriver's a very tight fit in the slot there. That's good. So we need to put the top on here. Let's take that off. Here's the piece that needs to go on. One side of this is chewed away, and that's to allow clearance for the spring that passes under it. The spring should be over this side towards the front of the camera, so obviously the chewed away side needs to go over that way somewhere. We have our little triangular lock washer arrangement and the screw. That screw is, the screw head's a little bit distorted. This is done up very tight when it's done up. And the infinity position is somewhere around here. Just looking at the arm on that to make sure it's not pointing anywhere funny. Here's the other section that slides on the top. Now I haven't done that screw up very tight yet, I've just nipped it up lightly. So I'm going to want to move this around until I can get my adjustments something like correct. So I can tell immediately it's going to be something like around there. This arm comes round and bears against that pin, and that's your adjustment. You can swing that in slightly, but you've got to get this pretty much right now, otherwise it's just never going to go. There are 2 springs that hold all the works together. If I can reach in and hook this one in here. And hook it over its post at this end. Now the springs they serve 2 purposes. They return everything to the rest positions, and they take all the slop out of the mechanism so that you don't have a lot of backlash. Otherwise you'd never have accurate rangefinder. this pin needs to go on the back. This couples to the other spring. It doesn't want to start. Probably coming at it in the wrong angle. Yeah, we're right. And there's a spring that goes on there. There's virtually no tension on there, which is a warning sign to me that this should all be around a bit further. Right, well, I'm going to check this. I'm going to look out the window. I'm going to see how many miles away I am from infinity and think about making some adjustments. No wonder I'm having trouble keeping my adjustments correct. They haven't put the two screws in here that hold this sliding section in place, so it's busy rolling backwards and forwards as it sees fit. And I just want to work out roughly where this should be, and I think it's about there somewhere at infinity. A quick look tells me I need to be somewhere about there. So I will undo that screw so I can remove that top and get access to the large screw underneath. Do that up tight, put this back and test it. Now, from memory, one of these two screws is shorter than the other. Well, they are on the 142. This one may differ, and that's again so it clears that spring. Now I'm just going to hold that with my finger and check and see if I need to move it. I've got an adjustment here, that being the lock there, and this being the adjustment, which will swing this in or out to, that's all the way in one direction, and that would be all the way in the other. Yeah, that would be all the way in the other. So I set that about halfway, and I'm going to roll that around to suit and lock that up. That's a good starting point. It means that when I get it as accurate as I can by shifting this whole top and retightening the main screw, I'll have some adjustment here. If that was all the way at one end of its travel, my only adjustment might be in the wrong direction and I might go nowhere. So I want that in the middle of its travel before I do my major changes. Well, with an awful lot of toing and froing, I've got that, so it's looking very good. It's almost spot on at the moment. I'm not going to make a final adjustment to this until I've got the whole camera fully assembled, and that'll be done as the final step before it goes out the door. The top panel on this is removable to give you access to get to those adjustments. So hopefully I'll be able to do that. If I don't need to remove that, that'd be even better, because I don't want to have to unscrew this little item here, because there's always a danger I'll either make a mess of it or it will be reluctant to go back in place. But as it stands, it's all looking pretty good. I'll get the rest of the body assembled here, which basically just means putting the top cover on, putting the knobs back in place, making sure I've got the J-shaped hook for my newly repaired rewind. I'm just looking to make sure that I've missed nothing inside here. It's all looking pretty tidy. The frame counter of course needs to go on. We'll just pop that little frame counter device on there. Yeah, frame counter, I'll just give that a light wipe with a bit of synthetic grease on the inside, put the spring on it, put it on its post. Lower the top cover into position. One last look to see I've got no dust in the finder. It's looking good. Check the frame counter's not trapped on anything, that looks good. Yeah, I've got two screws. There's a spring that passes by the side of this particular screw, so don't be surprised by that. The screw should just pass by the side of it. I'll release my shutter release, and I'll get the screw in at this end of the body correctly. Previously someone had it off to the side, so it was holding nothing at all. There we go. That's running in nicely. And there's our rewind button at the end of the body. The one that you have to hold all the time you're winding the film. So the advance lever goes on here. Do those little screws up. And we have the cap. I've thought about that cap. There's various things I could do. I could nickel plate it. I can't chrome plate it, but I'm not sure that it would look better nickel plated than it would as brass, so I'm going to leave that exactly as it is. This of course is left hand threaded, and I'm going to need to put the spanner on there to hold the shaft from moving. I'm just using a stiff pair of tweezers to tighten that up. That all moves nicely, which leaves me only the fight with the rewind knob and the J-shaped hook. And this is always a trial. Now, looking down here, I'll zoom you in a bit. That'll do. You'll see that there's a clear side along here. And there's a little quadrant cut out at this point. That little quadrant, that's where the latch at the back of the camera locks in and prevents the rewind top from moving, so that you can see through the finder while you're using the camera. And when you rewind the film, when you're holding this back, which lifts that piece out of the way, and it allows the J-shaped hook, which will be in that long slot bearing against the small pawl down the bottom, to push the pawl into contact with the shaft, and so allow you to rewind the film. Getting the J-shaped hook positioned correctly is a trial. It's never easy. I'm probably not going to achieve it on camera because I'll have to hold the camera at all sorts of weird shaped angles to get this thing correctly positioned. It doesn't want to stay. It's only held in with the rewind knob. Of course, the rewind knob is wanting to collapse down into the body, so you only need about 4 hands to do this. If I can hold that spring there, then the rewind knob's got a flat on one side. Well, the flat goes against the spring. So if I can get that hooked in there. No, that didn't go well. Right, I'll fight with that off camera. Well, everybody must have been thinking kind thoughts, because no sooner I turned off the camera and had another attempt at getting the hook in place, then it all went very smoothly. And so that's all in place. The rewind now works exactly as it should do. And that's the camera body dealt to. So now I have to do the shutter and lens assembly. Well, the shutter and lens assembly, that should be a relief, because that is very much a standard and simple thing to do compared with all of this, for which I had no parts. Okay, let's remove the retainer ring. The rear lens group, this is an Lectra f3.5 lens, I believe. Yes, it is. Shim rings, two and a half, and covered in oil. Front group, it's done screws with my fingers. Oh, I've certainly seen better. Now the shutter, that looks quite pretty. It's not covered in the usual scratches. I'll just rotate this little lock screw and get that out of our way. I'll undo that screw there. Our aperture setting pointer is pretty tight on this, so we'll get that off, and then it'll make it easier to deal with things. That's better. Here's our front plate and the shutter speeds settings cam plate. It's a little bit dirty, but the chrome on it's all very good. Here's the shutter. Anything odd here? Not apparently. Let's unhook that spring. Remove this. This is the main lever. Our shutter release. Yes, it does have a return spring on it. This little latch holds the shutter in the cocked position. It also blocks the action of the shutter release if the shutter is not cocked. What else do we want? We want this piece out. That would be a cable release socket on some cameras. Here it just serves as a guide. On later cameras, that position was used to install a flash sync mechanism. Take that lever out. That's got the main return spring for the shutter release really on that. The other one really just takes some of the rattle out of it. Remove this screw, that's a shoulder screw. And this lever, this is the B lever. The B lever's job, of course, is to hold the shutter open while you've got your finger on the shutter release when the shutter's been set to B. That all moves quite smoothly. Okay, that's enough for the rear of the shutter. That screw is loose. That's the alignment screw that aligns the shutter in the camera body. The diaphragm is quite stiff. The blades appear to be quite oily, so it certainly needs serviced. Well, given the amount of oil that was floating around in the focus helical and elsewhere, I'd say that that's seeped in from the back of the shutter. Those three screws are identical. They hold the shutter case to the mechanism plate. I can lift this off. Here's our shutter case with the diaphragm mechanism. Here's our mechanism plate with the shutter blades, and they look a bit oily and they're a bit marked looking. They'll need to be cleaned up. This, right, so I'm going to take this apart. Later shutters you could remove this arm because there were two cutouts to allow you to get to the screw heads. There's one of the screw heads there, but there's no clearance to get to them from here, so we have to take this apart a slightly different way. Or, yeah, it makes most difference when you're putting it back together. That screw is a little bit loose. Tip out the blades and the retaining ring, and here we have the screws that hold the aperture settings lever to the mechanism. This is the moving plate that swings the blades inwards or outwards, and the setting lever which fixes to it from the outside. Okay, so I've got to clean these pieces up, remove all the grease and oil. Hopefully they'll all clean up well. The shutter case looks to be very tidy. Some scarring down here. It looks to me, because it's near that hole there, when they either were going to tap that hole or when they were drilling that hole in the manufacture, that it slipped in the jig and the drill or tap is tracked across that surface. It's only a cosmetic detail, it certainly hasn't affected the function. So I'll start by cleaning the shutter case with some naphtha, and I'll start on the outside because that's the dirtiest and oiliest. Yeah, where the retaining ring fits to this, that's quite dirty. That looks to be probably just dust and oil, I would say. Yeah, it's cleaning up well. You can see the amount of oil that's involved by the colour of that. It's sort of gone yellowish. That's from the oils that have been on these surfaces and that I'm now swabbing away. I'm just looking at that screw on the back of the case there. I'll do that up tight and I'm checking the level of it, see if it sits up proud, because it may rub on one of these pieces of mechanism. I think I might shorten that slightly, because I'd much rather have that screw up tight than have it backed off slightly, because otherwise it might rub on something. it makes much more sense to just give this a touch with the file to remove a tiny amount, less than a thread I would say.